Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Rivers, and welcome to the fourth and final part in my video series on story structure. Welcome to Act 4, All or Nothing. So, in 4-act structure, the fourth act is, of course, in a very basic sense, the ending. Now, if you get more specific, it is, not only the ending, but the components that lead up to and resolve the ending. And there are a lot of things that the end of the book has to do because it is, in fact, the final act. It is the end of this story in its current form. Now, it may be part of a series, in which case there may be additional tales to tell after this. But insofar as story structure, every story needs an ending. Because, as we all know from canceled television shows, there's nothing worse than a story without an ending. And, we want to make sure that our ending is a good one, because particularly in the case of books and movies, readers often remember the ending, and it's especially important because it's the last impression you're going to be leaving with your audience. And ideally, it should be a good one, and it should do all the things that a fourth act needs to do, because a lot of people will base their decision to read your next book based on how the last one ended. If the book has a bad ending, they're not going to be interested in looking into the rest of the series. So let's take a little time to get into this series and talk about exactly what is involved in wrapping up your story. Now, one of the most important things that you have to remember about Act 4 is that Act 4 is the resolution to the story as it stands. So a lot of things need to happen in order for this to be a complete Act 4. Now, most of Act 4 will be spent building up to the finale. Now that we've discovered the key, we've figured out exactly what it is that requires us to push forward in order to advance the story. Now, this is when both sides are preparing for their final battle. This is when all the cards are on the table, and everybody is about to commit 100% to the final battle. So, this is the point where everything that you've set up so far starts to pay off. Now, build up to the finale, includes a lot of things. It includes, your characters preparing. It's like if there's anything they need to say, now would be the time to say it. There's any pieces that they need for the final battle need to be picked up. And as you're preparing for the finale, on both sides, there has to be, I guess, a sense of escalating tension that, things are going to come to a head one way or another. Now, any relationships that you've been building up to this point, whether they be romantic, platonic, or anything else, need to be resolved insofar as this story is concerned. There needs to be some sort of end cap to the relationship. Characters that don't trust each other, maybe they finally have developed a respect for each other. If you have characters in a romantic relationship, maybe they've finally agreed to at least start dating or something. And, in the case of, I guess, maybe any kind of relationship, they just need to kind of have the next milestone in their relationship reached by the end of Act 4. All those relationships need to be resolved so that when you're moving forward into the next phase of whatever you're doing with the next book, or even if it just is a one-shot, it's like any kind of relationships that you've got, they have to be at a point where you're satisfied to leave it. It doesn't necessarily have to be resolved. The two characters don't have to decide to get married or even decide to date or something, but there has to be some sort of a punctuation, I would call it, to the end of their relationship, so that we at least know where they're leaving off and where they might theoretically resume with the next one. Any people that have been holding grudges, that needs to come out at this point. This needs to be addressed. And another important part of Act 4 is the characters need to be pushing forward despite resistance. Now, this means that you've been presented with, that you're going to be facing a pretty significant challenge going into the finale. and they're not going to make it easy for you. The antagonists or any of the natural forces arrayed against you. It's like your characters are going to have to be able to show that they can push forward through this, through these obstacles, through these things that are attempting to slow them down. Because I think it's important, particularly in the case of protagonists, that we see them overcoming challenges, that we see them pushing forward, doing the hard thing, as they say, because it really makes it matter for both emotional investment in the story, for their own benefit, and we really need to see them pushing forward. And I think that's important for a finale, that your main characters, whatever they've been through up to this point, that this hasn't beaten them, that they are going forward through this to whatever comes next. And this all leads to what we refer to as the final conflict. The final battle, when both sides are waging an all-or-nothing conflict against each other. Whichever side comes out on top, they're the side that wins. Now, obviously depending on your story, that can be the protagonist, that can be the antagonist, whatever the case may be. But one way or another, these two giant tidal forces have to collide, and they have to make it messy, and it has to be resolved so that one side or the other ultimately has emerged victorious. Now, usually this is a pretty significant part of the book. A lot of time, a lot of effects, a lot of energy is spent on resolving the final battle, because the final battle is one of those showpiece elements to your story, where everything that you've been saving, that you've been building, comes out in this final section of the story. So the final conflict has really got to show off a lot of things. The hero and the villain, it's like they have to come up against each other and have that big battle. If you've been having fleets dance around each other, now is the time that they need to launch everything they've got. This is the final conflict for a reason, because this is the end of the story, so there is no point in saving anything for what's coming next. This is where you put in all, as they say, you play for all the marbles. So make sure that your story, that your plot, that whatever you have building up for this final act reflects that. It should have a gravitas and a significant amount of story weight, a lot of emotion to it. This is the end of your story. So this has to be one of those things that when you finally made it to the other side, that it was a heck of a ride, especially for your audience. And finally, when you reach the end of the final battle, the dust has settled. Now we've reached the last part of your 4-act structure. And I say last part because there is a little bit of an optional piece afterwards, but this is the last required piece. After the final battle has occurred, we enter the Coda, or the new normal. Because probably for at least a chapter at the end, or the last 10 minutes of the movie or something, either you've won or the antagonist had won, and whichever the case may be, things are never going to be the same as they were at the beginning of the story. So that being said, the end of your story should be a little bit of time adjusting to that. Whether that's celebration because you beat the bad guy, or whether that's going into hiding because the antagonist won. Whichever way that happens to go, that's where your story ends. This is the last note after the final battle, because you can't just have a final battle and just stop. You need to pretty much discuss what's happened to everybody, where everybody's going, and kind of do a little bit of groundwork to just establish, that all of your pieces are where they need to be. Now, the last, and this is an entirely optional element to the 4th act. You do not need to do this, but I often do, just because I usually have the next installment at least in mind, if not outlined, when I finish the previous one. Now, the last thing that you can do as part of the Coda and New Normal is seed in your next story. You can put in movie terms, an after the credits scene, or something at the very end of your story, or the last scene where you have resolved the story, everything's kind of back the way it was supposed to be, you've evolved into your new paradigm, and here is this little extra piece, this little extra thing. It could be something that was introduced in the story earlier, it could be somebody that shows up at the end, but whatever it is, it just kind of strongly implies to the audience that this story is not over, that there will be another installment, and that something else will be coming. Now, I think that this is best done when you can guarantee a relatively short period between installments, maybe like up to 2 years or something. Now, I have done this in my first release novel, Blue Moon, which at the time I did not anticipate such a long gap between the first one and the release of the second one. It will be quite a while before I'm able to complete it, because I have a few projects in line beforehand, but it is scheduled and slated to be done, and it will be finished. However, that being said, at the end of your story, it's like you've beaten the bad guy, you've resolved the new normal, and then there's something else. And this something else, like I said, can be anything. It can be something mentioned earlier in the story, it can be a new player in the game, but whatever it is, it has to give you the conclusion that this is what you'll be dealing with in the next installment. And then when you come into book 2, or the second film, this is where that element has to be addressed. So, make sure that it's significant enough to catch the character's attention. Make sure that you know that this is going to be a storyline that you're going to want to explore, because it's very difficult, if you've set a teaser, to not at least address that when you come to the next movie. Sometimes it's important, sometimes it's just a little bit, but in any case, whatever it is, you want to make sure that if you seed your next story, that it leads a tantalizing tease for your audience. So, thank you for joining me for this 4-part series on story act structure, and I will see you next time. If you like werewolves, check out my book Blue Moon, available in paperback and ebook on Amazon. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Catch you later.